was um, was you know we hope that this Passover will be the last Passover people have to spend in shelters or worrying about war and who knows. As I pointed out the other day at Seder, can you imagine being a Jew in Iran right now celebrating Passover? And according to news reports, the synagogue in Tehran, one of the main synagogues, was destroyed. So
Oh.
you can imagine how harrowing it is normally in a normal situation, not when,
Mhm.
Israel and Iran are at war. So um, who knows? Who knows? But it's good to see everybody here today. We got um, a class during Passover. So we always have at least one. And we're still letting people in and welcoming everybody. We'll hope everyone's had good holidays so far. As we move through this period of time, this is also, traditionally a time of counting of this. Today's the fifth day of the Omer, the time between Passover and Shavuot. And for our ancestors, this was a time of taking stock of agricultural inventory. But for us in the world that's oftentimes pretty separated from the natural world and from the agricultural cycles. It's a time of reflection and a time of thinking about inner work and how we're meeting challenges. And definitely, it's a time for studying. And some people study Pirkei Avot, the section on ethical behavior that and sayings that's in the Talmud, or studying certain sections of the Torah. There's Kabbalistic teachings during this time of how to work through the different sfirot, the different ways of looking at God's presence in the world through Kabbalistic counting, if you will. So there's lots of different ways, but one of the things we're going to do today is look at Avraham, look at our ancestor Avraham and Sarah, who are now still Avram and Sarai. Their names haven't been changed. That'll come up in a couple weeks. We'll get to that point. But last week we read chapter 12, which was um, the first week of studying Avraham 2 weeks ago. We had the call of Avraham, Lech Lecha, to go on the journey. But last week, when we read the rest of chapter 12, we read how his journey took a very strange detour to Egypt. And we read this puzzling and kind of crazy story about how Avram essentially, tells Sarai to lie and say, or maybe obfuscate at the very least, and say to Pharaoh or to say to the Egyptians that you're my sister. And then, of course, she gets taken by Pharaoh, brought into his home, and Avram does very well because of it. And then, uh, in kind of a foreshadowing of the plagues, of the 10 plagues, Pharaoh gets hit with plagues because of Sarah being with him and finds out. And by the way, it doesn't really say how he finds out, like how he knows that this is what's going on. But the assumption is that his magicians, his courtiers, his wise people tell him what's going on. And so he confronts Avram, says, "Why do you do this? Take your wife and get out of here." So that was what we read last week. I just so you know, I call that class, as you can see, uh, "Take My Wife," is a tribute to the great Jewish comedian take Kenny Ugman. But no, in a serious situation here, this is not Avram in his finest moment. And we've just met Avram, and already we're kind of thinking, really, God, this is the best. Um, but we're going to see maybe over the next couple weeks, maybe why Avram was the chosen one, was the one who's going to be our ancestor. We'll start to see it in his behavior. And, you know, it's possible that this famine that brought him down to Egypt was a test, and a test that he did not pass. I mentioned last week the rabbis actually say that maybe the reason why we actually had to go back to Egypt was because of Avram's mess up here, which is an interesting idea that Avram taking this stuff kind of put us into debt to the Egyptians, which is an interesting idea. But there is an understanding here to some extent in the tradition, in our tradition, that Egyptians be Egyptians, and Egyptians are going to do what they do because that's what they do. They do stuff like this, and you really can't fault them for being the way they are. They're not great people, but they do what they do, and so when they do what they do, it's not that we cut them slack, but we kind of say that's what they do, um, and for better or worse. So keep that in mind because we're about to have our other ancestors go down to Egypt with Jacob. And I'd say about, but in several weeks in Genesis, and we'll see what happens. Of course, well, we know what happens in Egypt a little bit, but just keep that in mind that Egypt represents those kinds of things. And in a way, it's not the worst. We're going to see the worst over the next few weeks because today we're going to be introduced uh, to Sodom and Gomorrah, and that looms large in the Abraham stories. The city of Sodom and the twin city of Gomorrah, those cities represent to some extent like the real bad stuff, whereas Egypt is bad, but it's the kind of bad that you're just going to have. Whereas Sodom represents like un you know there's nothing like that kind of evil. It's unmitigated, there's no it's the worst. And so that's what we're going to encounter over the next week, and we're going to be introduced to it today. So today we're starting in chapter 13, and I thought maybe Rosemary, if you'd start us off in chapter with the very beginning of chapter 13, which really is, if you think about it, read this line, is kind of a good break. Maybe that's why Christian scholars put a break here, but you can see that it's definitely connected to what we just read last week, which is not always the case. Sometimes the chapters seem to go off in a different direction without necessarily like needing the week before. This one definitely does. So let's look at chapter 13, the story of Lot.
From Egypt, Abram went up into the Negev with his wife and all that he possessed, together with Lot. Now Abram was very rich in cattle, silver, and gold, and he proceeded by stages from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been formerly, between Bethel and Ai, the site of the altar that he had built there at first. And there Abram invoked God by name.
So the first four verses are Avram's return, right? And Avram comes back from Egypt. That's the setup. Of course, it also says here that Lot is here. Now, we didn't really read about Lot in chapter 12. Lot is not part really of this story here. Um, but here he is in chapter 13. Um, and Lot is, I mean, today and next week, Lot is, and through the Sodom story, is definitely an important character. And we're going to talk about him a lot. Get it? Anyways, but he's an interesting character. And today we're going to actually see him do some stuff. So far, he's kind of like up till this time, the few times that he's been mentioned, it's more as like, and there's Lot, and he's Avram's nephew. His father, his father Haran has died, which doesn't happen, it seems, very often. I don't want to say the word a lot at all. So it happens. It happens to his father, and Avram becomes a surrogate father to him, and that's important because this is the first person that Avram is almost a father to. And there's going to be several people that Avram is almost a father to. Now it says that Avram was very rich, and we read why, because he got a lot of stuff when he was in Egypt, and he had stuff before he went to Egypt, but now he has even more stuff. And as he makes his way back to the land of Canaan, and that's what it's called at that point, it's Canaanite. It says that he goes back to the places that he was before. Okay. And it says he went from the Negev, from the south, all the way up to Bethel, which is by Jerusalem. So he's back in this area, and it says that he went to the places where he was living, as you can see, in tents, and the places where he built altars, because he already had built altars. In chapter 12, we read about him building altars. He doesn't build any cities, he only builds altars. And that's obviously one of the things that our sages picked up on, the fact that Avram is not a builder of cities, but he is a builder of spiritual locations, places that will obviously be important later on as holy sites to Jews. And as we said, the priests of Jerusalem eventually tell people, stop going to Bethel, stop going to, you know, these holy cities where there are reasons for people to be there, going back all the way to Avram, but only go to Jerusalem for sacrifices. But you can see Avram, and the tradition knows that Avram makes these places holy. He makes them special. And he built the altars. I mean, these altars are, again, like the signs that people used to put up saying Washington slept here. This is the place that Avram worshiped. Also says that he invoked God by name, and that is Beshem Adonai, the Yud He Vav He name, the name that we don't say. But it seems again that Avram is invoking God or using God's name in whatever rituals that God does, but whether Avram calls him Hashem or Adonai or however he calls God, he's not referring to God just as God with the word El or Elohim or El Elyon, which we're going to see later on as well, is a name for God. But he uses that personal name for God, that name that we hear throughout the Bible as the the intimate name of God, the name of God that we as Jews don't say because it's so holy, but it is our knowledge of God by this name, by Yud He Vav He, that makes us God's people, because we have the ability to kind of, or because God has told us, hey, call me by this name. Don't just call me God. So, um, coming back to his hometown is, or not his hometown, his places that he's making his hometown. You remember, he's from Ur, he's from Mesopotamia, but his new home is an act of return. It's an act of reset. It's an act of connection to holiness. So it's a spiritual reset, maybe, if you will, as well. So this is Avram getting resettled, getting back to his base. Any questions, any comments? That's the first thing that happens in this chapter. All right. Now here's the critical incident, if you will. Keep going.
Lot, who went with Avram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support them staying together, for their possessions were so great that they could not remain together. And there was quarreling between the herders of Avram's cattle and those of Lot's cattle. The Canaanites and Perizzites were then dwelling in the land.
Okay. So here's the critical moment for today. Avram and Lot have lots of stuff. And because they have lots of stuff, that leads to the quarreling between their staff, their shepherds, their ranchers, their cowboys, if you will. Now, this is actually a major issue, by the way, for anyone who has, in any country, in any time that there have been cattle grazing. This is real big deal.
The range war.
Yeah, people in America got killed over this stuff. Range war, you read about Billy the Kid and you read about the heyday of the cowboys. These were oftentimes battles between different companies, different cowboys who were attached to different ranches who go to war over who gets to graze cattle in a certain place. And this people died. I mean, 100 and something years ago in this country, people were getting shot regularly over these kind of quarrels. And so think about it in those terms. This is serious stuff. This is not just, you know, a couple of guys who are talking about, where the fence is. This quarreling could de- dev- de- devolve into chaos and bloodshed. Now, what is this line? The Canaanites and the Perizzites are in this line. The Perizi, the Canaani and the Perizi. These are the native inhabitants, right? These are the people who are living here. Now, the Bible reminding us of this is interesting because, you know, it's here for a reason. And the traditional answer to this is that the land is actually, at this time at least, this is the traditional answer that the rabbis gave. Both Avram and Lot are there as guests to some extent. They're not, even though God has promised it to them, God hasn't promised them yet. Like, this will be the place for your descendants, but right now you don't control it. And so there's an interesting idea here, which is that, like, both of them are 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 not, they don't have the greatest claim on property rights here. So it's not that, like, the Canaanites and Perizzites are either one of these guys, but both of them could have a problem with those guys. So it's not just that they're having a war, it's they're having a war on land that's not really theirs yet. So this creates, and that's the traditional answer. The traditional answer is no, that this is a problem because neither one of them can say, "Hey, this is our land." So, yeah, this is the an important, point here in the story of Avram, because his nephew up to this point, we assume, has been kind of his ward, is kind of his responsibility. But now Lot has taken on a responsibility to have kind of his own troop, his own band, his own company, and the companies are now having a problem with each other. Now, what's interesting about this is that we oftentimes talk about, how times of difficulty, especially financial difficulty, creates problems. But this is a case of financial success creating problems. This is an example of, sometimes it's not hardship that causes the strains, but success. And so the family dynamic here, the family um, busting apart, not because they're not doing well financially, but on the opposite side, they're doing really well, but it's causing friction. And so this is an interesting thing to remind us of, the fact that sometimes success causes problems too. Any questions or comments? Because no, this is the solution, if you will, the solution to this story, this problem. Okay, so here we go.
Avram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, between my herders and yours, for we are, after all, kin. Is not the whole land before you? Let us separate. If you go north, I will go south, and if you go south, I will go north."
Yeah. So Avram says to him, I'll let you pick first. Now, Avram, of course, is the senior person here. He's the father. He doesn't have to do this. He doesn't have to give Lot the first choice. So this is definitely an example of, again, Avram is older. He has more status. He would be respected more. Um, essentially he's taking care of Lot. He doesn't tell Lot, you know, go over there. That's your new spot, which he could have done. He basically says, Lot, I'm going to let you pick wherever you go. That's your place, and I'll go a different place. This is not what he has to do. It's not even what you could make the argument he should do. He 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 doesn't use his power to force the solution. Now you could make the argument he knows his nephew and he knows what his nephew's going to do, but this is not what he has to do. All right.
Lot looked about him and saw how well watered was the whole plain of the Jordan, all of it. This was before God had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, all the way to Zoar, like the garden of God, like the land of Egypt. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they parted from each other. Avram remained in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. Now, the inhabitants of Sodom were very wicked sinners against God.
Okay. So um this is chapter 13. Sodom and Gomorrah will be destroyed in chapter 19. Now, I want to make it very clear. I did not just give away the ending to the story. The Bible did. This is really, really obvious foreshadowing. It says they're going to be destroyed. Now, you can do that, when you're telling a story and you're telling a story where everybody knows how the story ends, right? So, look, a lot of people say that Sodom and the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah were well-known legends. They were well-known stories well before the Bible was written, right? That everyone knew the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, and what the Bible is going to do, which it already did with the flood, which it already did with the creation story, which it seems to have already done with the Tower of Babel, which was maybe not as well known as the other stories, but the Bible is going to give you their take on a well-known story, a story that many people have told. There's a lot of different ways already to approach the story, but the Bible is going to give you their lesson from it. So Sodom and Gomorrah are very well known. Now, again,
Rabbi,
yeah, go ahead.
but it wasn't known yet.
It wasn't known to Lot, right?
It
It
wasn't
wasn't
known
known
to,
to, it
it
was,
wasn't known, the destruction wasn't known to anyone yet.
yeah, but the listeners of this, the people who are going to hear this story are going to already know that there's a story of Sodom and Gomorrah,
You,
even if
you,
this is the first time.
you mean the writers,
Not just
because
the not
because this
just
was all written at the same time.
not just the writers, right? Because what's known about um, the way they talk about Sodom and Gomorrah is the fact that they can even say that is an affirmation that you all know this story. You know the way this story ends. So if you
But
take a
that's my
story,
point. We don't know.
yeah,
Let's assume we're reading this for the very first time.
so here's the weird thing. That's again, keep in mind that that um that there's an assumption, first of all, whenever it was written, let's say it was even written by Moses, that still would have been hundreds of years after it had happened. So what we know about Sodom and Gomorrah, because we see it and we see it obviously with the other things I mentioned with flood and creation stories, that if everyone has similar stories. You can call them myths, I don't care, whatever. Stories, myths, legends. If everyone has these stories, that means they're well known, right? They're we didn't, even if again this is stories that we didn't happen, we were telling stories that other people knew. Now, that's to say that like when people tell a story to you, even though you look, the first time you saw, and I use this example a lot, but and the Bible is like this in some ways. The first time you saw Forrest Gump, you already knew who Richard Nixon was. You already knew who JFK was. You already knew the cultural references in the movie so that the movie could play off of that and have you sit back and be entertained, laugh, cry, whatever, based on using figures and stories and incidents that you knew about already. The Bible does that as well. And everybody knows that. I mean, that's not like a secret. That's not even a blasphemous thing to say at all because the Bible just did it. The Bible just told you that you already know that Sodom. And if you didn't know, I'm telling you now. And the weird thing is you don't tell a story like this and throw that out there unless you're pretty confident that you already knew that Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. And I'm going to tell you, hey, the reason I'm telling you the story like this is because this was before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. It was so beautiful that it looked like the Garden of Eden. That's what it says, like the Garden of God, which is the Garden of Eden. And it looks like Egypt, which is like the most beautiful place in the world at that time. So, so they're telling you it's not what we're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah back in the day. So this works because everyone knows the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, how they're destroyed. And now we're going to tell you how they were destroyed. Now we're going to tell you how Abraham is fits on this backstory. And that's a really interesting thing about Abraham because starting today, and definitely next week when we read the story of the war of the five kings versus the four kings, the next story, is we're going to see Abraham's life played out on the backdrop of history, right? Very much like the Forrest Gump analogy that I made. You're going to see Abraham interact with history as a character, as a figure, as our ancestor. But how did he play? How did his life play out against that? How did he fit into that? And what's interesting is that we really are going to come away with this idea that Abraham is a really important person in history, but doesn't let history, he's not going to be he's not going to be changed by history. He's going to be himself, be our ancestor, be a role model for us with that happening in the background. Now, up until now, everything that's happened to Abraham, well, not a lot has happened with him, but he left his homeland, he went down to Egypt. All that stuff is like personal life stuff. Even the incident with Lot so far is a personal story. It doesn't really matter on the backdrop of history. But now we're going to start seeing Avraham and this week and next week, and then to some extent against the Sodom and Gomorrah story, we're going to see his life being played out against historical events that people knew about. And so now we're going to ask the question, what did our ancestor do during those times? What was his role and how did he stand out against that stuff? And it's really obvious next week. This week it's the introduction to it. This week it's setting it up because what it just set up is that Lot puts himself right next to Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot, of course, is attracted by his eyes. He's attracted by what he sees. Um, and he's maybe even, again, according to the rabbinic understanding, Lot is not our ancestor because he wants to party. He likes what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. And as we're going to see, he winds up in Sodom. He doesn't just wind up at this point, right? He he put his tent there. Now the Bible's just told us flat out these are sinners. These are bad people. Bad people. They are sinning a lot. Me'od, a lot. That's why it says very. These are not just your run of the mill city folk who are bad people. These are really bad people. And so Lot has decided to be near that. Again, we're going to see that he puts himself inside Sodom eventually. But this guy's attracted to it. He's attracted by the things that, again, are superficial. What is he shown? Like he's trusting his eyes, not trusting the promise, if you will. You know, Avram, builds tents and pitches his tents and builds shrines, you know, out in the fields, right? Out in the, in places that will be holy. I mean, what's this dude doing? He's pitching his tent in Sodom. He's saying like this is what my values are. So look, they had to separate. I mean, the Bible doesn't say, hey, they could have lived together. The implication is they had to go different ways. But um, Lot in picking this and picking not just an area where he can have really fertile area, but so that he can be near Sodom itself indicates that, maybe Avram knew what he was going to do. Maybe Avram, needed to get him away from him. I don't know. I mean, just keep in mind that Lot is going to be an important figure in the next few weeks in weird ways. Not just it's not just a case of I mean, I'm not going to again ruin the story, but Avram saves his butt several times. That's what's going to happen. It's a really weird dynamic where Avram, basically does everything he can to save his nephew. So remember, in Genesis, land is never just real estate. This is your livelihood. This is your identity. This is your future, right? This is your covenant. This is your values. It's always like that in Genesis. It's never just land. So Lot has chosen his area, and to some extent, he's chosen his future, right? Um, Look, we'll get into this as we talk more about Lot, but I will tell you that Lot represents it to us. Look, he's part of the family. I mean, he's not a descendant of Avram, but he's a cousin. He's a nephew. I mean, they're family, right? But there's something off with the rest of the family. I mean, not that Avram, as we saw, is not perfect, but there's something really, really kind of off with Lot in that, like, he should know better, right? There's something about him that's like his uncle, but not enough, you know? In the Zohar, in the Kabbalistic text, Lot represents somebody who's near holiness, somebody who draws energy off of holiness, but isn't ready to be holy. They feel it, they sense it, but they don't really want to make that step. They don't want to take on the responsibilities of holiness. So, he represents as a figure the type of person who gets close enough but never commits, and somebody who should know and does know and feels it, but doesn't want to take on the responsibilities and the burdens of it. And quite frankly, somebody who still wants to be able to party. You know, he still wants to be able to pitch his tents near Sodom, but he knows he's felt it. He's been around it. He's been blessed. He just isn't gonna take on the responsibilities. Any questions? Any any thoughts about Abraham and Lot so far? All right. So let's have John, if you want to continue to read what happens here with these this relationship.
Are we on
14. 14.
14,
Uh,
14, 14, 14? And God said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, raise your eyes and look out from where you are, to the north and the south, to the east and west. For I give all the land that you see to you and your offspring forever. I'm supposing that dovetails into 12:3, right?
yep. Yep.
Okay. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring too can be counted. Up, walk about the land through its length and its breadth, for I give it to you. And Abram moved his tent and came to dwell at the terebinths of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and he built an altar there to God.
Now,
Can we see that on the map?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I can look on my own map, but
No, 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 no.
everyone might want to see that.
No,
I mean,
I'll put it up on the map now. So when we look at I'm going to show you. Well, I don't want to show you that map because that
because
map.
Hebron is it's a flashpoint.
Yeah. Well, it's also the place where he's going to be buried, right? So this is a yeah, this is
Which begs the question, why would Israel ever give it up?
um it's interesting you said that. I just read a real because I because I read everything, right? I'm reading from every site. So so I I was reading I was reading Al Jazeera article about Hebron, about what's going on in Hebron, and about how it's hard for it's hard for Muslims there now. And I thought to myself, it's an interesting it's an interesting point that Al Jazeera is going to try to make, which is how does um, how does a site that's obviously so holy for Jews, how do the tomb of Abraham and the rest of the patriarchs, but we call it the tomb of Abraham. How does this site, which is also holy for Muslims, how does how do you justify the fact that Jews have wanted to come to this site, have come to this site? It's one of the four holy cities of Israel. The other ones being Jerusalem, obviously, but Tiberias and Sfat are the other holy cities, the four cities that Jews would make pilgrimage to. Um, how do you make sense of this? And so it was interesting how Al Jazeera tried to tried to do that because like they did admit that this was a holy site to the Jews, but they said, of course, it's a holy site because of Ibrahim, for Abraham. Uh, and what are the what's the where are these people going to get where are these people how are we going to come to an agreement on this? Like, where is this? How is this going to happen? Um, I, you know, I don't, I mean, I've told people this before. I haven't taken a group to Hebron ever, ever. Not since I've been taking people in the last 30 years. It's been 30 years since I've been taking people in groups. The last time I went there was probably 45, 50 years ago on trips from on trips with that I had gone on with my dad when he was leading groups, and we would take people there without a problem. This was in the 70s and 80s, early 80s. So I obviously I don't find it so necessary to take people there that we're going to run the risk of people being attacked, which happens very occasionally, but it does happen. But it's such a time consuming thing to do that I just generally have said it's not worth, taking a whole day to get in and out of Hebron. It's definitely something to see. I mean, I I don't think I've been there even by myself in a long time, like at least 20, probably 20 years. But definitely taking a group there, I mean, all the combined, when you weigh it out, it just doesn't make sense. The security, the time, the risk, all those kinds of things. It just doesn't happen. But it is sad in a way. But on the other hand, look, I don't believe Israel's greatest attractions are tombs. I really don't. I mean, that's not my form of Judaism. There are people who pray at tombs and want to pray at everybody's tomb, and that's not my Judaism. But there definitely are people who feel that way. Look, part of the issue is I don't even know that Avraham's buried there. I mean, we'll never know. You can't do a DNA test. You can't disturb the body. We'll never know if that's the right site. But I know that so many sites that are supposedly burial sites are not burial sites that, like, I'm not gonna lose sleep over it necessarily. But I definitely don't want Jews not to be able to have access to a place that they've been going to for hundreds and hundreds of years. I wouldn't say thousands of years necessarily because we don't know, but let's just say for a very long time, for over 1,000 years, Jews, or around at least 1,000 Jews, people have been going to that place as Abraham's tomb. Um, I just, I guess it's just a question of like, how do you prioritize that? Um, so Hebron is down here. It's one of the further south places that Avram goes. Obviously, Beersheba, which we'll read about, is one of the furthest south that we'll read it. But he does spend time here in Hebron, and this is still Hebron is part of the Judean heartland, right? Hebron is not far from Bethlehem. This is only about, you know 10, 15 10 miles. It's not very far. It takes a while because of checkpoints and security and everything else. But then you have Bethlehem to Jerusalem, which is only really I mean, technically speaking, Bethlehem is like suburbs of Jerusalem now. And then up here is Bethel, which is still another, 5 miles, 10 miles. It's not far. Um, so this area, this heartland, if you will, of what was the tribe of Judah and Benjamin, this is the area that, people who lived in Jerusalem lived around these areas. This is the area during the time of, King David. This is where King David was from, Bethlehem. You know, these are all important areas for us. And of course, going all the way up into the north, Shechem and Shiloh. These are also, and this is the area we call Samaria. But these areas are the biblical heartland, right? And so that's why when Jews talk about like making sure that they have access to it for all time, that's why, because these areas are holy to us. But look, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. None of these places, with the exception of Bethlehem, which we went to because we had Christian pilgrims who wanted to go there. I'm not going to go to these places with groups. I'm not going to take people to them. And like I said, I only took people to Bethlehem a couple of years ago because it was for Christians to go to. I'm not going to take Jews into. I'm going to say, look, Bethlehem is the city that King David was from. But I can't justify, the security and the that whole, you know, ritual of, having to not have your Israeli tour guide come in and having new people come in and then having to sit in a olive wood factory so that they can try to sell this stuff. That whole thing, I'm just not going to do that. I'll do it for people who want to go to Bethlehem as a Christian site, but I'm not going to take Jews there and say, look, King David was from the city. There's nothing to see anyways. So, but this is important for our story. This is important that at least during Abraham's time. What's important about it? That there's an oak grove there. There's alunim. There's the tree, the oak trees. It's kind of a campground, if you will. It's an oasis. There's something there for Avram to to live there and to make a home there at that point. Now, it's not going to be the only place that he's going to live. We're going to read about him in different places, but at this point, he's told his family, he's told Lot, he's told whoever's with him now, we're going to live on this side of the Jordan River. We're going to be on this side of the Dead Sea, which assumedly the Dead Sea was not dead yet. We're going to be in this area. We're going to be in the promised land, the area that God actually promised us, which assumedly when this chapter began, Lot was supposed to be part of that. I mean, we don't really, I mean, we don't talk about that a lot. We don't think about it. But really, at that point, isn't Lot supposed to be part of Avram's family? And isn't he supposed to stay with us in our area? So in the end, again, he decides to live with the people near Sodom and Gomorrah in the cities of the plains, which look beautiful, at least in according to the Bible. At that time, they look beautiful. Now, look, there's a couple things here about Sodom and Gomorrah that I want to say now, and I'll probably repeat it a little bit when we get to Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're gonna, it's kind of looming for the next 5 chapters. As we already said, there's a tradition and a very well-known tradition that these cities were beautiful cities that had lots of stuff, lots of wealth, were well-developed cities, and they end up being destroyed. Now, there's a debate going on in the archaeological world whether we've actually found evidence for Sodom and Gomorrah. There are debates on this. This is not, I don't want to say that this has been verified, and I don't want to say that this is 100% scientifically proven. But there is a theory that we have found the destruction of some cities that were not destroyed in a normal way, in the sense that um, it's not it's not a normal kind of, there was a city here and there was a bad fire, and uh, um, we can justify saying, well, this was a biblical miracle. People do they have come, and you'll see stories that will occasionally come out that scientists have found the original Sodom and Gomorrah, and that it was destroyed by fire and brimstone, if you will. Um, that's not that's not been definitively proven. Uh, so let me just show you what I'm talking about. Some of you might have seen this story. This is pretty, this is pretty recent. This is 2021. Um, have people seen this story? Do you know about this story?
No.
So,
I'm not.
um, again, we're talking about this now because we've been introduced to Sodom and Gomorrah, and you need to understand what happened. Um, this is essentially the gist of it. There's a archaeological site called Tal El Hammam, which means the Mount of Heat. So whatever you want to say about the story and the legend, whatever else, in Arabic, the city was known as a mound of heat, because people probably saw that what had happened there was some kind of fire or some kind of destruction where people could see there was stuff that was burned there. So around 1650 BCE, which would roughly be the time of Abraham, there was a disaster, and there the evidence seemed to indicate that there was an airburst created by a meteor or some type of comet that was in the atmosphere that created a blast that, as you can see, would have been 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb of Hiroshima. Air temperatures rapidly rose above 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Clothing and wood immediately burst into flames. None of the 8,000 people or any animals within the city survived. Their bodies were torn apart and their bones blasted into small fragments.
But then it says that the study was retracted.
Let me explain why.
Okay.
So, um, um, so what happened is, um, what, um, um, there was questions about how the research was done. So what happened was, because there was not because the science wasn't done up to par, they pretty much said you can't come to these kinds of conclusions because you haven't done the studies at the level that they need to be done. Um, I would say that it's safe to say that, and this is why I feel comfortable saying this, this is an ongoing debate. Um, Look, my take on this would be that there was some type of destruction that happened to these cities, to this area, and at least one city, if not multiple cities, were vaporized, if you will, in a way that made it seem like only one thing could have done this, which is God. How you tell that story and how you interpret that story, I think is kind of determined by what you can explain at the time. I still say we don't have a full explanation of what happened, and we don't know for sure that that area or that city is what they're talking about as Sodom. I will say this: we do know from lots of studies and lots of um, well documented, well established geological studies that have gone on in that area for well over 50 years now, with the technology and with the scientific tools that we have. It's well known that that area was at one point a very fertile and rich area for life. That at one point in the history of the Dead Sea was not dead. There was a point in time in the archaeological periods where the geological periods really that this area was a vibrant, rich area for life. Did people know this in the ancient world? I would say that they would have. Um, I don't know how people would have explained it um, in the ancient world other than to say that And again, this is way before Abraham. This is not, we're talking about geological periods here. We're not talking about even necessarily, major human development at this point. But this area that we call the Jordan Valley was at one point a lake that stretched all the way from the Sea of Galilee to below where the Dead Sea is. And we call it Lake Lisan, which is like the word lashon in Hebrew for tongue, that it was like a tongue, um, that this was a huge lake. So what was uh, this lake covered what we call the Jordan Valley now. And again, you can see that like this is not a question. This is not, there's no debate on this. Now, we're talking about 17,000 BC, right? This is not 1600, this is 17,000. So this is 10,000 years, 15,000 years before Abraham. But if people knew from, again, looking around and, they would have seen maybe fossils and not knowing that they're like how old they were, they could have looked at them and said, "Hey, there used to be sea animals here. There used to be there used to be there used to be this used to be water." They would have known that. Now, when you see an area that looks so almost un almost like not even Earth, and then and you know that there was a time when it was, you come up with you know, very theological reasons for it. So again, why did it happen? Why did these things happen? Because of tectonic shifts in the Rift Valley between Africa and Asia, and and tectonic factors have been suggested as possible cause for those events, and it has been argued that the level receded as far as 700 meters below sea level and then gradually refilled. So climatic and tectonic changes caused the level of the Jordan Valley to fluctuate in the Holocene in that period. Um, I mean, that's amazing. So we know that this didn't happen overnight. Wasn't like 17,000 years ago. It just all ended, but it gradually happened. And this is what we have today. We have the Dead Sea, we have the Jordan River, and we have the Sea of Galilee. So if people looked in that area and kind of tried to interpret how it happened, this is what happened. This is science. I mean, this is not, I'm telling you what we know scientifically. So you can understand why people would have a belief that something very powerful must have created this area of death. So when I say that these are well known stories before the biblical telling, before the editors and writers, and I mean, how many generations had people been telling stories of Sodom and Gomorrah for before we gave our take on it? So that's what we got here. That's what you have. Um, yeah, that's what we have here. So, any questions, any comments? This is going to play out in the next few weeks. What happens in this area, the backstory is real important. So that's why spending some time looking at maps and spending some time talking about the archaeology is pretty important. All right. Well, we're going to read a little bit more. We're going to jump into the next story, the next chapter. This chapter obviously was only 18 verses, but it really is a standalone unit. This story of of Lot and Avraham is a standalone unit. Now, of course, it's part of one Torah portion that started in chapter 12 with Lech Lecha. So the Lech Lecha story, the story of Egypt, this story of the separation between Avraham and Lot, that's all so far one chapter, and it's continuing. This chapter is also part of it. And I will say that this chapter is one of the less discussed chapters in the story of Avraham. It should be discussed, and we're going to discuss it, but it's one of the less discussed, the lesser discussed parts of Avraham's story because it doesn't really fit the narrative of Avraham that most people have, and it doesn't seem to play out in the sense of like how does Jewish history get formed or shaped by what happens. But I think the story is a pretty interesting one. The beginning of the story of Avraham with the backstory of the four kings versus the five kings. This is chapter 14. So, John, if you want to continue to read in chapter 14.
Now, when King Amraphel of Shinar, King Arioch of Elazar, King, I can't pronounce it,
Chedar Laomer. Chedar
Cheder,
Laomer.
Cheder Loomar, Lamer of Elam, and King Tidal of Goyim, made war on King Bera of Sodom, King Bersha of Gomorrah, King Shinab of Admah, King Shember of Zimboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zoar. All the latter joined forces at the valley of Siddim, now the Dead Sea. Well, that's
Yes.
interesting. That's
So
interesting.
so it actually says Yam Hamelach. That's what it says. It calls you the Dead Sea, but it also tells us that at the time they really called it the Valley of Siddim, which is definitely connected to Sodom, but it's not the same letters. This is Sodom. This is Siddim. Um, you know, it's in the same area. It's definitely well. Let's talk about what's going on here. What are these kings? So let me show you. Let me show you some maps. So um,
A lot of war.
yeah. So here's a little map that will show you what's going on here between these kings. So at the time, at the time we're reading, obviously, as we said, this is the area. This is the valley, the Jordan Valley, the valley or the Dead Sea area. You can see these towns. We're not exactly sure what they are. And by the way, I do want to tell you, we have found graves for people in this area that are massive graves. And it's not that they like if Sodom and Gomorrah are burned up and the people are burned up immediately, then there wouldn't have been graves because they got blown up. But we have found graves that date from that period that were significant enough to tell us that there were people living in this area. So
Rabbi,
so we know, yeah, and again, so this is not necessarily the graves of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, because assumedly those people got wasted. But there were people of Sodom and Gomorrah before that, generations before that, who we found tombs for them. Yeah.
is it safe to say these are not all these kings and their minion? They are not descendants of Abraham.
No, these are Canaanite kings. So Sodom and Gomorrah, Zeboim, Admah, Zoar, these are all Canaanite cities. And again, as you've already heard, the Bible told us it's Canaanite times. These are Canaanites. So you can see at the time, you have the Hittite kingdom, which is in the north here in what's today Turkey. Um, and they definitely had an influence on this area, with, of course, Egypt also having an influence on this area. But here you have these kingdoms here in the east, and we already heard that Abraham is from this area. So when we talk about the Fertile Crescent, we're talking about here between the Tigris Euphrates rivers, coming down into here. And so the Fertile Crescent is the area that you walk through and travel through and sail through. So you die if you can't go through the desert. So you come around here and you go all the way down to Egypt through here. But these kingdoms here, these kingdoms here, and this one guy in particular, Hadar Laomer, this is we know about these guys. These are actually historical figures. This war, this stuff happened. The wars of the Eastern kings against Canaanite kings happened. So when I say that this is historical events on a historical scale of like these are people that we know about, they're people that we know about. So this is before Babylon becomes a power during the time of King Nebuchadnezzar, for example. Those are we call that the new Babylonians. Those are the new Babylonians. These are the ancient Babylonians. This is the ancient empires, sometimes called in the Elamite kingdom, but also the areas of Sumer. These are the early Mesopotamian empires. So this is even before the Neo-Chaldean empire of Nebuchadnezzar. It's well before the Persian Empire, but it's in the same area. These areas are the headwaters of Mesopotamia. And of course, it's interesting because these areas are now very much in the news. This is the Elamite kingdom is in Persia, the Sumerian different kingdoms are in modern day Iraq, and so these areas are very much in the news right now. But in this time, they're trying to establish their power over Canaan, which of course, if they are in charge of Canaan, it means they're right on the entrance to Egypt. So Canaan is very important as a gateway to Africa and to that part of the world. This will be the case throughout Israel's history. And we've seen it. For those who read the Book of Kings with us and who read, you know, uh, who read also, through the Persian kingdoms, these areas are super important because the campaigns between the Mesopotamian dynasties and the Egyptian dynasties are huge. And Israel is just so important as a gateway between those kingdoms, between those empires, between those power centers. It's Egypt and Mesopotamia. And Israel's oftentimes caught in the middle. And this, in a weird way, goes all the way through the Greek period. Because when we talk about the Maccabees, we talk about the Ptolemies in Egypt, and we talk about the Seleucids in in uh, in Syria. And so Israel was again caught in the middle between two Greek dynasties, and finally, it gets settled when it all becomes part of the Roman Empire. When the Romans are in charge of both Egypt and this area over here, things get much simpler. Um, and that's the case for a good several hundred years, really into the Byzantine period. That's the case where the Romans are in charge of the area, and Israel is not a it's not a battlefield, but it was a battlefield during this period, and so we read about this strange battle between these kings. Now, um, I will say, well, let's let's read a little bit more and see what happens during this little battle. Okay,
All
12 years.
yeah, 12 years they served Hadar Lamor. Sorry, everybody. And in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Rabbi, help me out.
In the 14th year,
What?
Kedar Laomer. And by the way,
Kaudar.
his name has the word Omer in it, like the Omer period that we're in right now.
I need a shortcut for that one.
Kedar
Lamar.
La Omer. Yeah.
Kaudar Loamar. And the kings who were with him, and defeated Rephaim, Ashtaroth, Karnaim, the Zuzim at Ham, the Emen at Shaveh.
It's tough.
Give me a break.
Kiratayim.
They
Kiratayim.
need
Kiratayim. Well,
Kiratayim.
you wanted to read today, so
I know, I know. I should have done some advanced recon. And the Hortites in their hill country at
oh,
Sierra at what?
you went a little further, but that's fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And the Hortites, Horts in their hill country of Sierra as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. On the way back, they came to En Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and subdued all the territory of the Amalekites and also the Aramites who dwelt in Hazan Tamar. The, then the king of Sodom, the, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, which is Zor, went forth and engaged them in battle in the valley of Siddim. Seems like a repeat.
Hmm.
Okay.
Well,
King Chedorlaomer of Elam, King Tidal of Goyim, King Amraphel of Shinar, and King Arioch of Eleazar, 4 kings against those 5. Now the valley of
oh wait.
Siddim.
So hold it a second. So we call this the Battle of 9 Kings or the Battle of 5 Kings versus 4 Kings. Um, yeah, it sounds a little Game of Thronesy. That this is you know, that this is a battle which, look, we know that there were battles between Babylonian, Mesopotamian rulers and the Canaanites during around this time, around the time of Abraham. But it was control of trade routes. Now we don't have the names of these people in particular. We don't have archaeological evidence for these people. And we do have stuff about people who lived during this time. I mean, we do have we've found we've discovered archaeological evidence for some of these people with like for example, there's a theory that Amraphel is Hammurabi. Now, it's a little similar, but probably not in the sense that he would have and Hammurabi lived in that area. It's not like it wasn't possible, but there's not really any evidence, and it's it was said that it was him because he lived around that period. He lived around 1800 BC, so could have been somebody like that. Um,
So these people were fighting for trade routes,
Really, yeah, that's what they're fighting for. They're
and
fighting.
what did they have to trade?
Well, controlling that trade route would mean that if trade between Egypt and Mesopotamia, that if you control it, the more of the territory you control, the more you can essentially tax and
I get
make
it.
money off of, right? So
You say you want to be protected from the bandits that are around here?
so
Give us
essentially
5 of your 10 camels, and we'll make sure
Close
your 5 get through.
essentially, let's just say
So extortion.
let's just say that New York, for example, said, you know what? We really want to start collecting the tolls on the New Jersey Turnpike. And they just said, we're taking it. And people in New Jersey would have said, well, you can't do that. And we said, well, we're New York. We can do whatever we want. And that's what would have happened. And that's what happened is people made toll. They charged tolls and they we're talking about it right now in the Straits of Hormuz. If you can control trade, if you can control the free flow of goods, you can make money. And what's weird is that a lot of people say that like that's it's extortion, it's making money off of like nothing. You're not producing anything. All you're doing is basically creating safety. Yeah, I mean it's gone on for thousands of years. People have basically made money on being toll collectors and on being the people who are in power, over that area. So who controls it? It's a big deal. So these guys, the Canaanites had been, it said, for 12 years, had been paying, that had been essentially under their control. And then they said, we don't need this anymore. You can't control us. And what did they do? They rebelled. And so the Babylonians, the Eastern kings said, no, you're going back under our control. And so that's what happens. So I'll read a little bit more and I'll show you a map. Keep going.
Where are we? Now in the valley of Siddim. Now in the valley of Siddim was now the valley of Siddim was dotted with bitumen pits. What are those?
Tar, tar
Oh,
pits. Yep.
okay.
And it is, still is.
And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah, in their flight, threw themselves into them, while the rest escaped to the hill country. The invaders, and it's in parentheses.
Yeah.
Sorry,
No, no, no. Yeah, there's no
or
word.
in quote
It says
in
something.
brackets.
It's brackets because it's
Brackets.
either, it's not said, but we assume it's those kings, the kings from the east. Yeah.
Okay. Seized all the wealth of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, and his possessions and departed, for he had settled in Sodom.
Yeah. Now, right here, it doesn't say he has a tent there. It says he's in Sodom. Now, you could say he's still intense, but it seems as though he's actually in Sodom. He's in the town proper now. That's what it says. Here's what happens.
A fugitive brought the news to Abram the Hebrew, who was dwelling at the terebinths of Mamre, the Amorite, kingsmen of Eshcol and Anar, these being Abram's allies.
Now, again, this is Amorites or Canaanite peoples as well. But Avram had was living in Hebron, was living at the terebinths of Mamre, and he's there. He's got deals with them now. They're his allies, right? So these are Eshcol and Aner are Canaanites that he's allied with.
When Abram heard that his kinsmen had been taken captive, he mustered his retainers, born into his household, numbering 318, and went in pursuit as far as dawn. At night, he and his servants deployed against them and defeated them, and he pursued them as far as Hobar, which is north of Damascus. That's a big distance.
Yeah, yeah, it
That's
is.
a really big
Well,
distance.
well, it's about 100 miles. It's several days. I mean, when you go from Hebron all the way up to Damascus, yeah, it's 150 miles by up, 100, probably close to 150 miles. Maybe not 150, but maybe 150 as you have to travel it, not as the crow flies. I mean, somebody's going to tell me it's only 100 miles. Yeah, but I think as the crow flies, maybe. But yeah, as people have to walk it or write it or do it by you know. So let's just take a quick look at the what we're talking about here. So this is um this is a map of trying to make it as big as possible. This is a map of what happens. So the 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 blue line here shows where they were attacking when they came in. So you can see the different places that they hit on the way. These are all places that it says that they hit. Now, it doesn't say that they hit Hebron, but they did hit around it. And what does Avram do? He's the red line. He,
Tries to cut them off.
yeah. But you can see what he ends up doing is he chases them all the way up to Damascus. Now it says he has 318 people. Now that's a lot. I mean, that's not, it's not 10 guys, but 318 is not what you would normally go into battle with against a major power. Now, um,
Sounds like they like did a raid. They just
correct.
ran in, grabbed Lot, and got out.
Well, it seems as though they did more because they didn't just do that, right? They didn't just get Lot. They attacked them, and it seems as though they harassed them on their way back. So these guys are coming back with their spoils, right? The blue kings, the blue line is the kings going back, the four kings. They're coming back with this property, and they feel that they've won, right? They were successful. But what Avraham does is he harasses them as they leave. And so he attacks them and then probably keeps attacking them. And he attacks them, it says, all the way to Damascus. So he follows them from here all the way to here, which again, you can see this map is 30 miles. So I said it's about 100, 150 miles that they go, that he harasses them through. So this is not what we expect from Avram. We don't expect Avram to be this this warrior, right? He's he's gone all out he's risking his life to recover his nephew. Again, he's told your nephew's been kidnapped. One of the survivors of the battle comes and tells him your nephew's been taken hostage, right? He's done, he's gone. And Avram goes after him. And this is, I mean, he risks his life for Lot. Remember, the same guy who basically said, "Hey, I don't want to be anywhere near you, uncle, because we want to get the good land." I mean, this is what Avram does. And this is
Well,
why, again, we start to see a guy who is not a normal guy.
well,
Yeah.
no, I was just going to say that the writers are they're very good at being very. I mean, we're not privy to the conversation, the personal conversations, right? These are very broad statements that Lot wanted to be away, and I mean, there's a reason Avram went for him, right? There's more to the story,
So what do you think it is?
and
Wait, so
318
what so
people.
so
Let's
what do
come
you wait,
on,
so
they
what do you
can't
think?
count.
So what do you think it is? Well, by the way, that's a very specific number, right? So you've got midrashic, you know, you've got interesting midrash that Avram didn't take anybody other than Eliezer. What is Eliezer? His Eliezer we're going to read about is his major domo, his assistant. And Eliezer is the numerical equivalent of his name. And all he took is one other guy, right? Look, it doesn't say that. It says he took those born in his household. That could be Eliezer, but it seems like he took 318 people. But this idea that Abraham is a bad dude who's going to go, not bad in his strong way, he's going to go after him and do whatever he can to get his nephew back. It's pretty wild. It's a
Which,
very
which means they were closer than the Bible leads us to believe. Plus, it doesn't indicate any logistical issues of going 100 miles up and 100 miles back through probably hostile territory, water, food, and fight. It's like they're fighting their way up and they're fighting their way back, right?
yeah.
I'm
Um, no, but this
sorry.
this understanding that Avraham does this, is willing to do this. Let's finish up. Let's read a little bit more, and then we're going to finish up. Um,
Sorry.
no, let's finish up, and that's we want to.
He brought back all the possessions. He also brought back his kinsman Lot and his possessions, and the women and the rest of the people. So he brought back everybody.
Well, Lot
right?
is still his heir, right? Lot is his heir.
Yeah, but he brought back the other people that had been kidnapped.
So,
Yeah, yeah, but Lot is still, it's
Oh yeah,
important.
it's his nephew. Yes, it's his nephew, but it's his nephew who also already he's had a fight with, right? His people have
Right, but
been
he still
fighting.
doesn't have a son. It's still his
Uh,
closest, you
yep,
know.
yep, and that might be part of the issue, right?
Yeah.
All right, and we're going to finish with this line right here.
okay, it's fine. But that's a wild statement, though.
What?
Sorry. Sorry,
What?
everybody.
What?
With 318 guys, he fought his way for 2 to 3 days all the way
Yeah,
out.
but remember, it does say that he fought him at night, right? And so there is this
Which it had to have been a full moon. Otherwise, that would have been a tough
okay,
battle back
but
then.
you understand what they're doing. They're not deploying against them in broad daylight in a fixed battle, right? They're harassing them. They're this is guerrilla warfare, right? This is warfare where you hit people at night when they're in their tents. So
All right.
this is the way again, a much smaller force is going to be able to do some damage. Now,
A tired force. Okay, I got you.
so the understanding is that he brings back the stuff and um we're going to finish off here because the next part of this story is another whole discussion. So we're gonna finish off with this line. Um,
When
we're gonna finish off here. Just finish this last.
okay, when he returned from defeating Cher de Lamar and the kings with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shivea, which is the valley of the king. Is that the valley of the kings? The you know
No,
the
in Egypt, no. This is the Valley of the
I mean, I
Kings.
know it's not, but okay,
But this is
sorry.
the Valley of the Kings in near
That
Sodom, near Sodom. So we're
okay.
going to read the next week. We're going to read this incident of Avram and what happens with the booty, if you will, the booty split, which is an interesting story in its own, and we don't have time to get into it. But and I wasn't even sure whether we were going to get into 14 at all today, because it is a unit in its own. You can see this story is a story on its own. Definitely gives us another perspective of Abraham. But what it also does is it really does. When you read chapter 13 and then see what he does in chapter 14, you realize that Avram is definitely not holding any grudge against Lot. On the contrary, he's saying Lot is my boy. I'm going to take care of him, even when he winds up with people that, as we're going to see, are not good people. So Avram has now saved his nephew, but he's also saved the people of Sodom. He's also done a solid for his Canaanite neighbors. Because remember, the Sodomites are Canaanites. These are his neighbors. These are the people that he's trying to live amongst. And he's now just proved himself to be a very powerful ally. And again, well, you can make the argument that he's doing it to save his nephew. He doesn't just save his nephew, and he doesn't just show his loyalty to his new home, because remember something, he was originally from the areas that King Kedar is from. He is one of those Mesopotamians. We read that just a couple weeks ago. He's from the east. He's not Canaanite. He's those people. And he went to war against them to protect his new neighbors. That's a pretty significant thing too, which people don't talk about a lot. You don't see that in a lot of the commentary because there's this kind of idea like let's not associate Avraham with Amraphel and Cheder Laomer. Don't associate him with those guys. But he was. Those were his people. Those were his people. Those were Avram's people. So he just went to war against his own ethnic brothers and sisters to save the Canaanites. So I think that's a significant thing that, again, our sages didn't really focus too much on because they didn't really want to talk about Avram being Mesopotamian, even though the Bible says he is. Um, so we're going to read about what he does next week, about how he responds to this success that he has. And again, put against a historical event, which for us is saying, look at what our ancestor Abraham did during this battle. Look what he does when push comes to shove, how he allies himself with his Canaanite neighbors, his new home his new home. So it's a really interesting story. It's a story which again shows you that again, even though Lot and his uncle Avram have some difficulties, Avram is going to have his nephews back. He's going to take care of them. But again, what could have happened if Lot had never separated in the first place? Never would have had to happen. Avram wouldn't have had to go into battle and risk his life for him. So there's something there. So what's the song we're going to finish with today? Well, in honor of Lot and Avraham separating at this point in chapter 13, I thought we'd listen to this song just a bit, just the opening. Here you go. Wait, I got to share the music. If I don't share sound, it might not come through. I hope it goes through.
Loving you isn't the right thing to do. How can I ever change things that I feel? If I could, maybe I'd give
To the chorus.
How can I when you won't take it from me? You can go your own way. Go your own way. You can call it another lonely day. You can go your
Good
own
music.
way.
Yep, you gotta love Fleetwood Mac, and yeah, I don't think they'd ever assume that their song would be taken as midrash for Lot Lot and his uncle Avram. But yeah, we're gonna read more about Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah, and there's probably a lot of songs you can come up with for Sodom, for the stories of Sodom. But yeah, it's a pretty wild part of Avram's story. And if you think about it, if Avram's introduced to us in chapter 12, this is chapter 13, chapter 14. And then, as I said, it goes all the way to chapter 19. The backstory in the background and the like everything in the background with Sodom and Gomorrah is actually pretty important. It's a good chunk of the Avram stories, which really go to like Avram really goes through chapter 22. So through most of Avram's story, Sodom and Gomorrah is like looming in the background. It's the we'll talk about what it is, but when we talk about it and when you see it, there's a reason for it. It is a huge part of this section of Genesis, and of course, it's going to be important throughout. Sodom and Gomorrah will be referenced by the prophets. It'll be referenced in the Christian Bible, and there's some interesting stuff there too. So take care, everybody. Have a great rest of Passover. Tomorrow night we're going to be looking at on our Wednesday night class. We're going to be looking at a little bit at Yiddish. We're going to be talking about Yiddish and Eastern European Jewry, which is perfect as we think about our upcoming trip to Central Europe. I keep saying, I want to say Eastern Europe. It's not really Eastern Europe, it's Central Europe. It's the heartland of Ashkenaz and the place where we spoke Yiddish for 1,000 years. Think about that, 1,000 years. Longer than we really spoke. Really, if you want to know the truth, we spoke Yiddish for longer than we spoke, I want to say, really, to be honest, longer than we really spoke Hebrew. Hebrew has always been our language, right? Hebrew is always the language of our Bible. It's always the language of our text. It's the language of our Siddur. But the language of our daily life, Yiddish was the language of our lives for our ancestors, for those who are Ashkenazi, not for Sephardic Jews. I don't want to say for every Jew, but for Jews who are Ashkenazi, from 1000 AD to 2000, to 1950, for 900 years, that was our language. That was the language that our people spoke on a daily basis. Not Hebrew, not Aramaic, not Latin, not anything else but Yiddish. So it's an important thing to think about. It's amazing how much we've forgotten. It's amazing how much was obliterated out of our consciousness of a language that was a part of our lives for 50 generations. So it is weird how quickly a language can be forgotten. Kind of scary, but we're going to talk about it and reclaim it a little bit tomorrow night. So take care, everybody. Happy Passover.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks,
Bye.
Rabbi. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Hi,
Thank you,
guys.
John.